the subjunctive. The subjunctive is the land of unreality, dreams, possibilities, uncertainty. Where the indicative, which is what you've been using up until now, expresses probability or certainty. For example, il est probable que tu es malade. Il est certain que tu es malade. The subjunctive expresses possibility or uncertainty. For example, il est possible que tu sois malade. There we use the subjunctive of être. So, when do we use it? In main clauses, it's used to express a wish or a command. For example, vive le roi, long live the king. Qu'il parte, let him go. In subordinate clauses, which is where we mainly see it, it's used after, and there are a number of conditions. I would advise, when you see que, warning bell should go off and you should sort of think, should I use subjunctive here or not? Here are the instances where you should. First of all, verbs of wishing. Things like vouloir que. That's actually one of the most common uses. You will see je veux que, tu veux que, il veut que. Désirer que. Aimer mieux que, préférer que. Je veux qu'il aille à Londres. Je préfère que vous restiez ici. I want him to go to London. I prefer that you stay here. Note, and this is a general rule for clauses, just anyway, we use this je veux qu'il aille à Londres because je, the subject, is different to the subject of the subordinate clause, which is il, qu'il aille. If we wanted to say I want to go to London, we wouldn't say je veux que j'aille. It's grammatically correct, but it doesn't sound elegant. In this instance, we would use je veux aller à Londres. We would use an infinitive. Make that a general rule. If the subject is the same in the main clause as in the subordinate clause, then it's much better, much more elegant, much neater to use an infinitive. Okay, but in this instance, the subject of the main clause is different to the subject of the subordinate clause, so we will go ahead and make it a clause, que, and in this instance, we're going to use a subjunctive. Je veux qu'il aille, je préfère que vous restiez. 2. Verbs of commanding, forbidding, necessity. Verbs like ordonner que, défendre que, il faut que. So they're ordering, forbidding, commanding, insisting, these kinds of verbs, they're in order. Le général ordonna que les prisonniers viennent le voir. Now I know you might say, well, that's the normal present tense. It looks like it. In fact, for regular verbs, even though venir is not necessarily regular, for some verbs, the third person plural, il and elle, looks just the same as the present tense, but in fact, that is a subjunctive. Je défends qu'on fasse cela avec un dictionnaire. I forbid you doing it with a dictionary. So there we have the forbidding. We're going to use the subjunctive. 3. Verbs of doubting, uncertainty, and denying. So here's that uncertainty, that element of uncertainty, subjunctive. So verbs like douter que, il est possible que, also, il est peu probable que. Yeah? Il est probable que takes the indicative. It's probable, meaning it's quite likely. That's going to be the indicative. But if we're saying it's possible or it's unlikely, peu probable, these ones take the subjunctive. Nier que, denying. Yeah? Il n'est pas vrai que, it's not true that. Il semble que. Il semble que takes the subjunctive. It seems that. However, il me semble que takes the indicative. I suggest one way to interpret this is, it seems to me that, and if you're French, you're going to be quite certain about things, there's no doubt there, so it's going to be the indicative. Je doute qu'il sache. I doubt that he knows. Il est possible qu'il ait fini son travail. It's possible that he's finished his work. Vous niez que je sois capable de comprendre cela. You deny that I'm able. Il n'est pas vrai qu'il puisse venir demain. It's not true that he can come tomorrow. Okay. 4. Verbs expressing emotion. So this is also one instance where we use the subjunctive when we're talking about our emotions. S'étonner que, regretter que, we're being surprised, we're regretting. Then être with an adjective, whatever it may be, because we're expressing our emotions. Here are some examples. Être faché que, to be angry that. Être ravi que, to be delighted that. And so on. There's many more examples like that. Être content que, être désolé que, etc. Il est dommage que. It's a pity that. So we're expressing this pity. But not espérer. I know, it means to hope, and you think, but shouldn't it be subjunctive? No, it's not. It's an exception. Just think verbs expressing emotion, subjunctive, but not espérer, not to hope. Here are some examples. Je regrette que tu sois malade. Il est dommage qu'il ait fait une telle bêtise. It's a pity that they made such a mistake. 5, verbs of fearing, which is a little bit like emotion. Craindre que, avoir peur que, place ne. J'ai peur, but by this I mean you add a little ne in front of the verb. J'ai peur qu'il ne meure. I'm scared that he'll die. Je crains qu'il n'ait refusé. I'm scared they refused. Yeah? So it's along a similar line to this idea of expressing emotions. Que, warning bells, emotions, fearing, yes, we're going to use a subjunctive. But when we're using verbs of fearing, we're going to add that little ne in front of the verb. 6, after penser and croire in the interrogative or negative. Now this gets a bit confusing. Je pense, I think, je pense que, je crois que, they take the indicative. I think that, I believe that, yeah. That's indicative. However, if we're putting it in the negative, or if we're asking a question with it, it's raising doubt about it. There's a certain amount of certainty there. Yeah, I think he's pretty good, right? There's a certain amount of certainty, so he is indicative. However, if we're saying, I don't think that, or do you think that, there's a lot of doubt. So now we're going to use the subjunctive. Pensez-vous qu'il réussisse? Do you think he succeeds? Or he has succeeded, or he will succeed? Je ne crois pas qu'il le fasse. I don't think he will do it. Note here, and we'll get into this a bit later, that with tenses in the subjunctive, we really only use 2. The present tense and then like a passé composé sort of thing with it. There is an imperfect subjunctive, and you will see it in books, so it's good to be aware of it, but it does sound quite... the word highfalutin. It does sound quite, it is quite formal language, so you won't see it all that often. Okay, so that's why, yes, with the tenses, when you want to say will, with a future tense in the subjunctive, you translate that by using the present tense of the subjunctive. Okay, 7, after the following conjunctions. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's some of the more commonly occurring ones. Bien que and quoique, you'll see a lot. They mean although, they take the subjunctive. Jusqu'à ce que, until, it takes the subjunctive. Avant que takes the subjunctive. Be aware that après que takes the indicative. If you want to look at it this way, avant que, before you go, he wants to see you before you go. Well, there's some kind of uncertainty there because it hasn't happened yet. We don't know whether you're actually going to go or not. Whereas après que, well, it's happened. We can see that it's happened. There's no uncertainty there. That's a way to remember it. Avant que, subjunctive. Après que, indicative. À moins que, unless. Afin que and pour que, both meaning in order that. Non pas que, not that. Pourvu que, provided that. Pas avant que, not until. Sans que, without. À condition que, on the condition. Au cas que, in case. So anytime you see one of those conjunctions, it's the subjunctive.